That
It
wasn't
sounds perfectly. That's fine. The wheel of time turns and ages come and pass, leaving memories that become legend. Legend fades to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave it birth comes again.
Welcome to Through the Glass Columns, a Wheel of Time read-along podcast. Each week, we will be reading, discussing, and digesting a small selection from Robert Jordan's fantasy opus. This quest is led by Tylor, a true Wheel of Time warrior.
I have all stories, ages that were and that will be. And I'll be joined by Greg, a complete novice to the Wheel of Time.
The Wheel of Time and the wheel of a man's life turn alike without pity or mercy.
Join us each week as we read the Wheel of Time in our own sweet time, traveling deeper and deeper through the glass columns.
But what does that even mean?
No. You don't get to find out yet.
Hello and welcome back to Through the Glass Columns, your weekly read-along Wheel of Time podcast. I, of course, am Greg, who is very excited to be joining you as we cross the 400 mark in my copy of The Dragon Reborn. And joining me, as always, as he eagerly counts down the hours, nay minutes, nay seconds until the Wheel of Time finale, is Tylor. Tylor, how's it going?
It is going very well. Not only am I counting down towards the end of the Wheel of Time's season 2 on television, I am also counting down until this book gets really, really exciting. I think that countdown might be at 1 week at this point. So good things are coming down the path. But if we're talking about Wheel of Time and we're talking about television, I believe you have an edition about non-Wheel of Time television to discuss today.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't have any non-visual discussions or anything like that. So I just wanted to throw it out there that, when we talked about the Wheel of Time television show, we talked about ways in which it's kind of weird because it seems to borrow from other genre shows, but, predates those genre shows as a work. But I will say I've been watching and enjoying the Ahsoka television show. And again, we never give a single clue about when we're recording these episodes. You just can't possibly tell when we're recording. They're timeless. But maybe we're recording 15 minutes early tonight to see the Ahsoka finale after our recording. And while I've been really enjoying it, I will note, I think it has ripped off a few things from the Wheel of Time. And it struck me that you might feel the same way. Have you noticed some similarities?
You know, I have noticed the occasional stray similarity here and there, but you brought this up initially, and my reaction was like, I hadn't thought of it, but now you mention it, yes, that makes sense. So I think that I am very curious to hear what your kind of full list or description of the similarities are, because I have a feeling I've probably missed some of these, mostly just because I've been so obsessed with the Wheel of Time TV show that Ahsoka is way lower down in my priority list right now.
Well, I will say the one that really got to me, and this probably comes from listening to a disgusting number of recap podcasts on every episode. So I'm listening to 8 episodes, and there's a character on the show named Baylan Skull. And his apprentice is Shin Hati. And so a lot has been made of these two characters and who they are and what they're doing. And I think that's kind of because they're new to Ahsoka. And there's a mythological connection where their names, Skull and Shin, are the wolves who bring around Ragnarok. And wolves come from the Wheel of Time. But the real connection there is Baylan has talked a lot about we need to break the cycle of kind of violence and war and so on. And when he said that, all of my recap podcasts are like, wow, he's channeling Daenerys Targaryen, who said she wanted to break the cycle. It's all Daenerys. And I was like, no. That is not Daenerys. That is the Wheel of Time in our mythology. And finally, on one recap show, somebody wrote in with just the text of the opening of the Wheel of Time. And they were like, oh, wow, maybe we should read these books. That sounds kind of cool and so on. And I think, that was the big one for me. Did you make that connection?
That one I actually had not caught. I had seen a whole bunch of jokes online about Baylan being like, I love the idea of it, but not the practice. My favorite version of that was thinking about academia. I love the theory of it, but not the actual living of it. but I had not made the connection between those characters and the Wheel of Time. The connection that immediately jumped to mind to me was the other one that we have discussed off air, which is the fact that now apparently there are basically space tinkers in Star Wars, right? There are pacifists who ride around in their wagons and seem to be nice enough that Ezra now wants to protect them in their pacifism, which feels like a Perrin thing, just sped forward 12 years. That was the connection that immediately jumped to mind for me.
Well, and I already mentioned that I stuck my foot in it because somebody called this Star Wars trailer park, and I assumed they were making fun of the naughty and was like, "Hey, don't be rude." And they're like, "Excuse me, I grew up in a trailer park. I'm not being rude," which I felt really bad about that. There I was calling them out, but absolutely those characters, right? And they, I think what's probably happening there is they're drawing off of when we met them, we talked about the Pikeys and the Romani, these kind of nomadic peoples that exists still in Europe, but, even flourished not all that long ago. And so I think, to me, Robert Jordan is responding to those cultures that were around as he's writing these. And so Star Wars now borrowing them. But it's a great addition because it's not actually, a part of anything we've seen before, right? It's a new version of that. And these kind of crab hobbit people, I saw one person say we need to refer to the main one as Bilbo Crabbins, but they're kind of fun, and they got a little bit in the action in the most recent episode we've seen. Again, when are we recording this? Maybe all this is wrong in an hour. Well, and the last thing is just that we have a more present version of female witches. These are not new to Star Wars, but I would say they're being more prominently placed. And in particular, they reference that they follow the strings of fate. And there's very kind of similar language to predestination being kind of woven by, something. And then there's a lot more that are kind of simple, but I will just say it would not surprise me at all to learn that some of the creatives behind the show are big Wheel of Time fans. And we know Dave Filoni, the writer, is a huge Wolf guy, so it would only make sense that he is also a Wheel of Time fan. So hey, without warning, we just spoiled a whole bunch of a Star Wars TV show, so we should probably stop and move along to what people actually tuned in for.
Don't we that? We didn't spoil the Star Wars television show. No, I think there are a lot of really interesting parallels there. And the interesting question, of course, is like how much of that was intentional versus how much of it is like modern storytelling just evolving since Jordan and absorbing a lot of these themes. I don't know the answer to that. So instead, I will try to dig into something I do know a little bit about. Chapter 36, Daughter of the Night. This chapter begins with Perrin, who is looking for an empty cabin in the ship that they have just arrived on. And he is thinking of kind of the coincidence of Aiel arriving when she did and having the name that means Falcon and all of these things. He also encounters Loyal briefly and decides he does not want to share a cabin with him because he just wants to talk. And then he starts thinking about the wolves and how they have been causing problems for him. He thinks about how Elias had made peace with that part of himself. And then he thinks a little bit about his axe and how he's feeling too comfortable doing violence, especially after the battle with the White Cloaks. And then eventually he falls asleep. Suddenly he is in a room filled with dense fog and does not have his axe on him. Hopper is there, emerges from the fog and starts taking him through it. The fog gets denser and denser, and eventually he is surrounded entirely by blackness. And then eventually he emerges into a room where he can see Baal-Zaman speaking to a number of individuals. He tells those people that they are sleeping, that they are within what he refers to as the world of dreams. And he basically starts to sorry, I lost my place in my notes. He notes that there was one individual who failed to stop someone from leaving Tar Valon, and when that individual doesn't have a good enough excuse, he kills them and then says that that person is going to wake up not at all. They will basically be dead upon the morning. He also notes that no one will know what happened to that person, and that is way more horrifying to me. Then Lanfear arrives. They start having a discussion about whether or not he is using what she calls her domain. Beelzemon accuses her of disloyalty, and they kind of briefly discuss what kind of the best plans for what to do with Rand are. Hopper then leaves Perrin out of the room, tells Perrin that he needs to be cautious, like a cub hunting a porcupine, which is just a wonderful wolf sending. And then he notes that all wolves are in Teleron Riod, even the ones who have died or the ones who are yet to be born. Perrin then sees a few visions. He thinks about other dreams that he has of Rand surrounded by Murdrail and a number of people. He sees Rand channeling and kills all of the individuals who are surrounding him. And then Perrin tries to warn Rand of more Murdrail, but instead, Rand attacks him. Perrin then wakes up and has a scar where he was hit by the fire from Rand in the dream, and he goes to see Moraine. She is going over notes, and he notes that they are notes that he notes that they are letters and writings about their time in the Two Rivers. Moraine says that many Aes Sedai, if they learned of his dreaming and of his interaction with the wolves, would want to try to gentle him, even though it wouldn't do anything to him. And then Perrin starts asking questions about Zareen. She basically says, no, don't ask any questions about that. And then he goes outside, and immediately, who is there? Zareen. She is kind of briefly discussing, I'm jumping backwards now. Moraine tells him what her name means first, and says that Zareen is the name of an absolutely beautiful woman, one who will tie men in knots. And so Perrin realizes why it was kind of odd that he said that name fit her. It actually doesn't perfectly. Then he goes out onto the boat, and there is Zareen. We then cut into Rand's head. He is realizing that he almost killed the actual Perrin in his dream. He is then approached by a woman and a number of men who ask to share his campsite. They get too close. He kills them all with some sort of a flaming sword, and then realizes afterwards that there are 11 bodies, not the 10 he originally expected. That's a long chapter. Greg, say literally anything about it. I need a drink. Not like a drink, but a little bit of drink.
Sure. Yeah. I just took a long snooze during that because that was a lot of plot. So, and I don't know that it exactly fits our usual mold of like if the summary is super long because there's a lot of plot, we don't have a lot to talk about, because a lot of this felt symbolic and important to kind of recognize the real world impacts of these. And, I just love it because it's in Dreamland as a part of this. But my silly first reaction is the wolves all being there made me think of the Rainbow Bridge, which is something I don't know if everybody's elderly mother sends them this, but since I was like 20, every time a pet dies in my mom's house, she sends me like, I miss them, but I know I'll see them over the Rainbow Bridge, because the Rainbow Bridge is where all our dead pets are waiting for us in heaven. And when we die, we cross the Rainbow Bridge and are reunited with your gecko from science class and your dog from childhood and the rabbit you kind of liked that one day and so on.
I went straight to we all float down here. So we had very different experiences with this.
All right. So general serious reaction. I thought this was a very good chapter and probably my favorite of the 3 tonight, despite it being in the dreams. And I think I spent most of my time thinking about how this space is becoming more and more real, and that's something that's been hinted since I think literally the first chapter, right? Like, or thereabouts. Like Moraine is telling us early on that dreams matter, and now we're getting just this made quite real that this is happening, and all of these people are using this space to then say all of that, but make Lanfear seemingly the queen of this realm is pretty intriguing.
Yeah, that was my big takeaway from the first half of this chapter, right? I think there's some interesting Perrin stuff in terms of him grappling with the wolf and trying to get away from it and then having it show up in his dreams. There's the kind of reinforcement of the idea that like you can die in the dream, which I feel like is very important for you because it makes Teleron Riode, which is how I have to pronounce that now because of the television show. It makes it a little bit more kind of serious and, solid. But in spite of all of those kind of little things, what I got from the first half of this chapter was like one sentence. Lanfear considers herself to be kind of the ruler or the master of Teleron Riode. And I think that should make all of our characters afraid, because she seems like the villain most willing to just get involved in characters' plots. And a lot of characters' plots are kind of unintentionally ending up in dreams these days.
I just love it when a beautiful woman gets up involved in my plots. So yes, I think that's true, and part of what is intriguing to me, and I want to assert to listeners that I know nothing, is the fact that the television show already has that word in the second season, which should presumably be something close to the Great Hunt, not the Dragon Reborn. And I know from internet stuff that Lanfear should be in the show by now, but the fact that she's around and becoming a major part of the show is intriguing. I've called it the order of operations before, but I really do think that this chapter is made to make you recalculate how you're thinking about who's on top. And what comes to mind is actually the Sith, right? Always two there are, no more, no less. And the point of the way the Sith code goes is a master to hold the power and an apprentice to try to take it. And that feels like the relationship we're seeing right now, is that either is a threat to us, they are pure evil, but in the tension between them, they both grow their power and their influence. And so the fact that we have a brutal death, we have these lieutenants, we get that somebody is chasing someone out of Tar Valon, and then we get a big clue next chapter who they're referencing. But I think all of that to me suggests that it's not as tidy on that side of the conflict either.
Yeah. Well, and I think for me, I kind of felt like I had some hints at this point that there was kind of tension and cross motives on the dark side, right? If nothing else, we've had like the White Cloaks as really clear villains for 3 books now, but they also have nothing to do with the Dark Friends and that side of things. The thing that really shocked me in kind of that dynamic of the villains you're describing is how much the Lanfear-Baelzamon conflict felt like a argument between equals rather than Baelzamon clearly being superior to Lanfear. I think we hadn't really seen those two characters interact at this point, and I had maybe assumed that there was a hierarchy between them, at least the first time I read it. And this is maybe the first time we're seeing like, no, they are actually much kind of closer to being level. It seems almost like Baelzamon is more the first among equals rather than actually a rung above in the hierarchy.
Well, and they have a moment where it's actually a little like Voldemort and the Death Eaters, when there's like questions about, was it better to be in Azkaban because then you were truer to the cause, or were you supposed to stay hidden? There's kind of a Bellatrix Malfoy tension there. And it felt a little like that. Lanfear has been locked away in prison working for the cause, and kind of feels like Baelzamon sat out the fight for so long and didn't respect him in that way. It also reminds me, in Doctor Who, there's a couple in some Matt Smith seasons where Rory and Amy Pond, where Rory, for very Doctor Who reasons, has to like live for 1,000 years waiting for her to be born, essentially. I always liked Kumail Nanjiani, the comedian, was like, you just win the argument from then on, right? Like, oh yeah, babe, but remember the 1,000 years I waited for you? Like, we're not going to your friend's wedding. And so I feel like Lanfear, and I swear there's a point to me mentioning all this, just random spoilers, I'm just going as far afield as I can and taking out whoever is looking. But I do think there's a way in which Lanfear is saying, my imprisonment, my growth in power means I get to win the argument from now on, and you don't get, I'm not subservient to you, even if we're working on the same side.
100%. And I think that there was even a moment in there where Baelzamon questions whether she is working on behalf of their lord or whether instead she is working on behalf of herself. And that's maybe an open question we need to be looking at for Lanfear. I think so far we have just been assuming like the Forsaken are the monolithic evil on behalf of the Dark One. And at least now one of the Forsaken seems like they might be kind of a rogue agent in at least, some situations. And that I find interesting. But enough about the dark evil side of the Wheel of Time. I want to talk about the puppy because Hopper is back. And we get my favorite wolf sending so far. You need to treat the world of dreams like you are a cub hunting porcupine. And then we also get the justification for why Hopper is still here. The previously addressed all wolves are here, even those who are yet to come or, have already died. This felt to me like a weirdly kind of like light breezy section in the middle of a couple of big exposition dumps. What was your thought on kind of the wolf presence in this chapter, which I found to be personally the most exciting section of the chapter?
I'm very interested in how they fit in mythologically. And again, we've had a lot of these questions on Ahsoka and Rebels before Ahsoka. That I don't think of wolves as being mythological, right? The way I think of other creatures. And so it's very interesting to me. I think that's partially my heritage, but I understand that like Norse mythology, they are very, spiritual entities and have that kind of supernatural. But I've never felt that, so it feels weird to put them here. Now, that being said, I loved it, and where my mind went was, Dante when he wrote Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. He designed hell so that he needed a guide, and so as the world's greatest poet at that moment, that's what you have to pretend when you're an epic poet. He was led by Virgil, the last great epic poet, into that. And so when we have Hopper here, I'm like, Hopper's Virgil. Hopper's like the great poet of the world, taking us in and acting as guide. And even though this isn't quite the underworld, Joseph Campbell would say that the actual like death underworld plus our psychological underworld is also partially a dream state that's all Jungian, blah blah blah. So I do think there's something to that we are traveling into an underworld as all our characters spend more time here, and we are going into their subconscious. And so to have a guide like Hopper is nice, and it's just nice to see the puppy again.
Hopper is wonderful. And I know you haven't watched the TV show, Greg, but Hopper is by far the best casting of season 2 of The Wheel of Time. I am very impressed. The last thing that we get in the dream is this kind of brief interaction / conflict with Rand. I don't really have a ton of notes here other than to say I think this and the section at the end of the chapter do a really good job of letting us know that Rand is not in a good way right now, even though we haven't checked in with him in a little while. And I think he's just in a darker place than I expected, and I have nothing else really to add to that. Was there anything else that stood out to you in either this or the later Rand section, really?
Only just to metagame a little and think, okay, this is why we're not being put in his head often, is we need him to be a little more blank. And, especially in the later section, he's fighting his madness or wondering how he will avoid madness, but also maybe am I already mad? And I think all of that put together, it's like, oh, so it would be really tricky to be in his head and to keep that a mystery, right? So I think it's going to be important as all our characters converge on Tyr. Yes, Tyr.
Good work.
I second guess myself every time now. As we all converge on Tyr, to be wondering, is Rand going to be on our side still, or has he fallen into madness? A realm of dreams and madness, aka Ahsoka's last episode. See, they just keep coming. So
it also just sounds like the title in that other fantasy series that I refuse to read because it sounds too horny for me, but a something of something and something. That's how that series works, right? A court of whatever and whatever.
Yeah.
We are then left with a conversation between Perrin and Moraine, which I found a little interesting because most of the time, all I want in the Wheel of Time is two characters to talk openly to one another. And This is like the third time that Perrin has done it in this book, and I'm kind of like, okay, can anyone else have the conversation now? I feel like I've seen this a little bit. The only new kind of real interesting piece of information here for me was the meaning of Zareen/Fail's name, but I didn't get a ton from Moraine here. She was a lot more closed off than in the previous conversations we've seen between her and Perrin.
Well, and it does draw back to that earlier time when she's like, tell me about your dreams because they're meaningful. And here he's actually following the instructions. And then she's like, cool. I mean, the only other thing I wrote in my notes is it becomes clear from that conversation that Perrin is in danger, that he kind of is like, well, I'm not Rand, so nobody would really care about me. And she's like, oh, no, people would care about this. This is important. And you should not run into some Reds. Red Aja, I should say, not communists. Red Aja.
I mean, try to avoid both of those things, but Red Aja is worse, I guess is what we're saying. I did just want to really quickly note while we're kind of on this subject, kind of the signs of danger. I think that we have identified Moraine as like, look, you're in trouble. But I think Perrin actually misses one earlier because he doesn't have the full context. Beelzemon and it punishes the guy who dies horribly because he didn't catch Matt, right? This is clearly one of the footpads who Matt got away from. And I found that as kind of like a not subtle enough, but like everyone gets it, but you feel good for catching it. That's the kind of like Easter egg that I want in this sort of chapter.
Yeah. And I think so much of this book has been built around those, right?
Yeah.
It's like, they're not even necessarily Easter eggs, although you're using that as the world is using that, but it's just like it reminds me of when you watch Dunkirk and all of a sudden the like pilots from one plot line come flying through. It's like it makes perfect sense that these events are spinning in all strands. You just don't often get those crossovers the way this is being told. So those kind of moments of synchronicity are important, and they feel good in the way an Easter egg feels good, but I think it's a little different. So yeah,
you are correct. Agreed. I was misusing that term in exactly the way everyone misuses that term. Good correction. I should be better than them. I should always be better than them. Chapter 37, Fires in Cairhien, unless you had last thoughts. Excellent. Just to note, I hate the show for making me do this, but it's Cairhien apparently, not Cairhien, as I was saying before. I
look forward to never remembering that.
Excellent. Egwene is on board the Blue Crane, the ship that she and the other girls have gotten aboard. They pass a number of abandoned villages and places where there clearly has been conflict in the civil war in Cairhien. And they basically have been found the kind of smallest cabin on the ship. It turns out that they basically agreed to take one cabin instead of three. And it turns out that the girls have been passing themselves off as Aes Sedai, even though they are not actually Aes Sedai. They talk about kind of making it seem as if they are Aes Sedai and letting everyone assume, even though they are not directly stating that they are. They also note that all of the girls have been experimenting with the Twisted Ring ter'angreal, and they've had mixed results. None of them have been able to get into the world of dreams other than Egwene, but there have been some kind of like odd side effects and partial successes, it seems like. She also describes a number of dreams that she has had recently. She says she continues to dream of Rand being in danger, that she's dreamed of Perrin, including a vision of a hawk and a falcon fighting one another. She has had dreams of Min springing a trap, and Matt being followed by a man who was not there, and also a dream of Matt with an illuminator, someone setting off fireworks. There's a deluge of other dreams. I don't have them all in my notes, but there's a lot of little symbols here. She then starts to feel helpless and wishes that she could go back to her family, and then she kind of has that realization we all have at some point that going back to her family wouldn't actually fix any problems. The other girls at this point start to kind of have a little bit of a discussion about what their plan is going forward. And in particular, Elaine starts to talk about how they need to do something about Cairhien, how terrible the civil war is and what harm is being done. Egwene seems surprised about this because Cairhien is kind of in a rivalry with Andor, but Elaine notes that over the last couple decades since the Aiel War. They've actually become fairly close because of the grain trade between the countries. And then at this point, Egwene realizes that her dream about Matt was about a gray man who was after him. She realizes that she has solved it, and that means that many of the others may also potentially be solvable. At this point, the ship they are on abruptly stops, and they realize first they think it must be a mud flat, but in fact, there is actually a sunken ship that was probably put there by bandits. The girls decide that rather than wait for the ship to get unmoored, they are going to go onto shore and walk their way to the nearest village, and that way they can catch the next ship that comes by, whether it is this ship or not. They go on the Cairhien side at Nynaeve's suggestion. Egwene is a little bit upset about the fact that Nynaeve seems to be taking charge, but in the end, they go on the shore and very quickly encounter a number of individuals, not brigands as they expected, but instead figures in brown and gray. Aiel. I probably didn't need that description to be that long. I only have 3 things really to say about this chapter, but I covered all of the details. Good on me. Greg, I found this to be the kind of transition chapter of the 3. The first chapter, I was like, wolves are fun. The third chapter, I was like, learning about the Aiel is fun. This chapter was just getting the girls where they needed to be. Tell me I'm wrong about that. What did I miss that made this chapter more fun or exciting than what I'm seeing?
I'm currently second guessing correcting you, but I feel like you just gave away the start of the next chapter because they're not revealed to be Aiel until the next chapter, right? It's
sorry,
just
Ben
a
and
figure,
Lindsay, my bad.
Yeah, so my first note on this is, hey, we need to move the clock forward, right?
Yeah.
And it felt a little bit like those chapters with Rand and Matt moving through the country. It's like we're gonna just yada 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 a few days here to keep everybody moving forward towards Tyr. So I cannot defend this deeply. It also felt to me like if this chapter had a purpose, it was move the clock and confirmed that it really was Egwene in all the dreams. And I feel like this book has gone out of its way to like really, really push that Egwene is actually special, right? That's when they say they were experimenting with the Tangreal. It's like, oh, she is actually the one who needs to be doing this. And she is actually appearing in everybody's dreams. And as has been said by others in those dreams, it's her, it's the real her. It's not a projection or a mental image of her or something. It's actual Egwene dream skipping. Sure.
Well, and I think that what's interesting about this chapter then is it's kind of about confirming that Egwene is a dreamer. It's about kind of reaffirming that those powers are hers and not something that she's just getting from this object. And kind of the way it does it is by throwing a bunch of images at us that we as readers have some more insight into, but Egwene is unable to use at all. And I think it's this interesting kind of trick that Robert Jordan is doing of both establishing Egwene has a power and then making it very clear that she doesn't know how to use it even well enough to get the basics. And so it kind of like gives the character room to grow while also affirming what makes them special, which seems like it's a bit late to be doing that. But book 3 of 15, like, I guess it's still time to be establishing details that will pay off later.
Yeah. And you know, if this book overall has a purpose so far, it seems to be to lean these side characters into the paths they started on and really put them all, I don't know if you can say equal footing to Rand because he's still like the real chosen one, quote unquote.
Yeah.
But to say that these are all really important paths that they're on and advance them down that. And I just want to say I'm glad Egwene got one because it would be very 90s of Robert Jordan to be like, and each of the boys is special in a really remarkable way.
Yeah.
Also, there's a girl. So yeah, I do appreciate that she got it. And I do like this as her power. It also feels important to me if we're going to keep separating everybody, even if they come back periodically, to have a means of communicating between them seems like it's going to be important.
Oh, Greg, thinking that these characters will communicate with each other, my sweet summer child. I think in the early section of this chapter, the only thing that stood out to me is it almost felt like a fun little like 2 or 3 pages of paper where the girls were describing, like, here are the things we told the people on the ship to make them think we were Aes Sedai. We bought some new clothes. Nynaeve insisted they be nice, but not too nice. Like, it could easily kind of read as 2 or 3 pages of filler, but I actually found it kind of fun to be thinking through, like, what are the girls able to do that they wouldn't be if they weren't pretending to be Aes Sedai, and what assumptions are people making without them having to say things. Like, that section worked for me, even though I guess my entire contribution to it is to say it was 3 pages I didn't dislike. Like, but that's okay. That's what you need sometimes.
Yeah, I think the only other different thing I would say about it is this tension between Nynaeve and Egwene, and particularly who can lead, seems to be a priority of the presentation. And so to say, it still feels natural. It feels like it's not quite mother-daughter. It kind of, I'm going to read it in my own masculinity, but like, when I was a teenager, I had cousins who are like 4 years behind me, and there comes a point where they kind of challenge, like, well, you're not that cool, right? Like, like I can be better than this. And it's like, it's a little bit of a like, well, now that I know the whole world, like, you don't get to tell me what to do, and so on. And so that's what it feels like. Maybe it's more sibling for a lot of families, not mine particularly, but in a way they feel that kind of that tension is just kind of natural as both come of age and don't need to be listening, don't need to be like subjective.
I actually
submissive.
Yeah, there it is.
There it is.
I actually kind of thought of it from the other side. I was thinking it a little bit more of kind of like a mentor-student relationship when you reach that inevitable place where the student is no longer the student, right? I'm thinking of like my, professors in grad school who very abruptly, one year we went from them being my teacher and me being their student to the next year, like, hey, let's get beers and dinner because we're both professors. And that transition is kind of weird and awkward, and I can't imagine doing it while you and your teacher went to grad school together. And that's kind of what's happening to Elaine and Nynaeve here, which I think adds a lot of tension to it. So I guess I'm just saying I find it believable, but any kind of example of this we can think of, it's 2 people who are close in age but had a very different power gap, and now that power gap is gone.
Well, and all of that agreed with, co-signed, pretend I said it, don't give Tylor credit. And then also Egwene makes a reference to her trauma again, which I think continues to be something we risk forgetting, is that and she makes it, I think it's this chapter, she says something like, clearly Elaine hadn't been tortured for a year or something like that. And to remember that it's not just I've learned enough that I can challenge your knowledge. It's because I like that analogy, but it's also like, and I've seen the real world, right?
Yeah.
If your professor asked you for going out for a beer and you're like, no, let's do cocaine, I'm into hard drugs now because I've seen the real world. That would be the analogy to me, right? Because she's seen a side that Nynaeve and Elaine has not.
That's not what you do with your former professors on Thursdays. We need to talk about our usual plans, apparently. I do actually want to just highlight one more thing that's kind of embedded in this Egwene Nynaeve debate, which is the fact that we get episode 1 of what will become an ongoing conflict: wool dresses or silk dresses. Right now, Nynaeve is up 1-0, but get ready for the clothing conflicts to span the next 13 books of this series. I'll keep the scoreboard going. Don't worry about it. I don't expect you to have anything to say about wool versus silk. So why don't we jump towards the dream section of the chapter, right? There are 8 million visions in these dreams. Which ones stood out to you? Which ones were exciting? I don't want to highlight my favorites because my favorites will be the ones that have the most exciting conclusions.
Really, the only one that stood out was Perrin, and we got the return of the Falcon, but the Falcon fighting the Hawk was interesting to me. And we've had no tell of a hawk, like a literal hawk at all, but
correct.
Hawking, right? We have Arthur came to mind. And so I assume he is being now courting sounds weird, but like it seems like he's on he just had a meet cute, right?
Yeah.
And is moving into a relationship with the Falcon. So who is the Hawk and how will that complicate this was where my mind got stuck in that section.
100%. I think the only thing that I would note is that we have now gotten two visions with Perrin and a Falcon and a Hawk, and they were slightly different, right? Egwene's vision is a Falcon and a Hawk fighting each other. Min's vision was a hawk on one shoulder, a falcon on the other, and the hawk was trying to affix a leash to Perrin. And so that kind of combination, especially if we're thinking like leash and, as you said, Archer Hawkwing, that immediately puts me in the Sean Shan headspace, right? I don't know if that's exactly what's going on with the visions, but connecting dots, that is one possible place to go here. The only other one that jumped out to me in this list of visions is I think this is the first time we've heard Matt and fireworks put together, which is just an interesting combination in the midst of what feels like a lot more kind of serious metaphor work going on elsewhere in this section.
And his dice get a prominent mention, but that was not surprising. It's like, yeah, that's what's his astrological sign now is the dice. So he's dice are ascendant and he's moving into their influence. Yeah.
I have no way to make that joke better than you did. I should have laughed. That was a solid astrology joke. The end of this chapter then is an excuse for the girls to get off the boat. That's all I have to say about that. Anything at the end of the chapter that worked for you?
No, I did. I mean, I found myself questioning a little. Are we supposed to say this is a trap that has been constructed? Is it just that the brigands took down this boat here and so now we didn't see it and we crashed? But especially since none of that is picked up in the next chapter, it really felt it was like, just get off the boat.
Yeah.
Like, move along.
Also a solid Star Wars joke. You are killing it with transitions that I'm not reacting to at all until 5 seconds later. Excellent work. I have nothing else to say about this chapter. Like you said, I think it gets us to the right place. I think it moves that clock forward and mission accomplished. Let's do the fun stuff. I think the fun stuff is chapter 38. Maidens of the Sphere. So both Egwene and Elaine immediately embrace the source upon seeing these individuals who were originally hiding. They soon realize that they are facing female Aiel. Nynaeve, it is notable, does not embrace the source, probably because she can't. She's not angry enough. Egwene at this point realizes that she recognizes the Aiel as being familiar and thinks that they look like Elaine's cousins. She also says she feels an odd kinship towards one of them, a woman named Avienda. She is a maiden of the spear, and she says that the girls do not have the faces of wise ones, but they seem to have the ability to channel, and so she asks whether or not they would be able to help her heal an ally who was recently wounded. Nynaeve immediately jumps in and says, yes, I would be willing to help. I will heal. And it's at this point that a number of other Aiel who have been hiding very nearby immediately make themselves known. We are introduced to a number of individuals, most notably Avienda, Bane, and Chiad get call outs in terms of all of the details of where they are from. And we learn a little bit about how the Aiel think of themselves in terms of having septs and in terms of having clans. And we also get a few kind of hints at the way Aiel culture works. We get a question: if Egwene and Elaine are such close friends, why are they not first sisters? And there's a bit of confusion initially, first because first sisters normally means you're blood related, but it turns out in Aiel culture you can basically adopt someone as a sister. It's also worth noting that we learn here that Maidens of the Spear do not give up the idea of being with a man. They instead give up the ability to wed a man or to have children, but neither being a maiden of the spear nor being first sisters with someone limit your ability to have a relationship. And in fact, it's noted that Bane and Chiad pretty much only have relationships if it can be the two of them and someone else. Nynaeve then finally, with the rest of them, arrive at the injured maiden, and while she is trying to get herself mad enough to to channel. We then get a bunch more lore dump about the Aiel. We learn that Maidens of the Spear generally never stop being maidens unless they are called to a place that is referred to as Roidine. We also learn that in the Aiel waste, water is so rare that swimming is considered to be about the scariest thing that could possibly happen. And we also learn that Aiel have rules about who they can honorably battle, and that no Aiel would hurt a woman who is not trying to harm them themselves. Finally, Nynaeve gets herself to be mad enough that she is able to channel and heal this other individual. We learn just a little bit more about the Aiel, specifically that they once served the Aes Sedai but failed them, and that may be the sin that sent them into the Threefold Land. And then the chapter abruptly ends. There's really no wrap up here. We learn a lot of things about the Aiel. Nynaeve heals one of them. That's the chapter. This is one of those chapters, I think, where you can say nothing happened plot-wise, I was bored, or you can say, oh my God, there's so much juicy detail about a culture we haven't learned anything else about, I'm excited. And I think where you fall probably depends on what type of reader you are. And as you mentioned right before we started, Greg, it also probably is determined by whether or not you're reading a half an hour before you have to review a podcast. So how did this chapter land for you, given that I know you were kind of reading it at the last minute? Did some of that lore maybe feel like it slipped by, or just wasn't quite as interesting?
If you'd asked me before your summary, I would have said like I barely caught any of it. But as you went through that, I'm like, yeah, I remember all this. Like there was nothing you mentioned that I felt like I'd really missed. I guess it was a surprise. I think I said on the podcast, because where else would I have been talking about Wheel of Time last week, or one of the recent times where we got a reminder of the Aiel. I was just like, yep, we're just supposed to remember that things are happening with them and moving on. So I think to me, that was definitely like, it's book 4, at least, if not further. And so I was kind of surprised that we got back to there so fast, and that we also did get a major dump of all their information. Nothing in that description really surprised me. I mean, I think it is a smart way of saying they're very similar, but slightly different. You know, these marriage customs, these kind of, I was thinking of the Rohan shield maidens and things like that. So some of this felt like familiar types of mythology. I guess the one question I had, and maybe it's not even worth asking, but would we assume that this is the rest of the party of Aiel, that one was captured in the village where somebody else was? Matt was?
I think we are too far away for that to be likely. Unless Gaul was in the cage for weeks or maybe months. I think we are basically east side of the continent versus middle of the continent, probably at least several weeks travel between them. So it's possible, but I'm not sure the timeline quite lines up. This is probably a second group, which honestly is maybe the more intriguing answer, right? This isn't one group of Aiel across. It is seemingly multiple groups of Aiel, all potentially either looking for or doing the same thing. We know that Gaul in the previous couple chapters ago was looking for signs of he who comes with the dawn, which was the prophesied kind of savior of the Aiel people.
Right. And so that would make sense. Let's send out a few parties to go hunting for he who comes with the dawn. So I liked it. I mean, again, you listed off all the facts that seemed most interesting. I was gonna, I almost interrupted for a few frat boy like hoots and hollers at the threesomes. But I did think it was very funny when the way it played was like Elaine made eyes at Egwene, like, hey, maybe this is our solution. Like, we can both be with Rand. Like, let's do this. And Egwene was like, no. I'm thinking of Poe Dameron making eyes at Felicity from the television show Felicity, like, hey, should we make out? And her just be like, no, it's not happening. And it kind of had those vibes to it, which is funny because this love triangle or who will end up with Rand has seemed to be referenced a lot, but not ever anything we really are meant to care about moving forward. So
Yeah, the interesting thing in this to me is that we get this moment where Egwene thinks Elaine is thinking about sharing Rand, and then Egwene's immediate response is to say, well, neither of us will get him. And that is interesting to me for two reasons. I think one, because that kind of suggests that Egwene has given up on Rand in a way that I'm not sure I had really anticipated before, right? Egwene seems to think there is absolutely no chance that either me or Elaine is going to end up with Rand. She seems final on that in a way she maybe didn't in the previous book. The other thing that I found interesting about that is Egwene has shut the door on herself with Rand, but it seems like she's also shut the door on Elaine with Rand. And based on Min's vision, that is premature, right? Min has said that Rand is in some way tied to herself and Elaine and one other person. And so we don't know who that third person is, but we know there is an ongoing link with Elaine and Rand. And so in the same chapter, to have kind of the mature acknowledgement of, hey, this guy's not for me, and also, but he's not for my friend either, I don't need to be jealous. Like, one of those things is about to get pulled out from under Egwene.
It's you, Tylor. You're the third. Just what you wanted to always dream about, being with the Dragon Reborn. Yes. And so I don't think I remembered that piece. So that's very helpful that you just reminded me of this. But I want to go back to what I said, which is I don't really care. Like,
Okay, yeah.
maybe this is my like, hey, I missed the previous romance. I'm just not into romance, but it just hasn't felt like a priority to me. And maybe to justify those negative sentiments, I'll just say, if the character is on the verge of going mad in the last chapter, I'm not like, can't wait to see who he smooches, right? Like, that person's going to be in danger. And I don't think this is building to like a true love saves him. 'Twas beauty that stilled the beast or whatever. I don't see that as being part of this narrative. So I don't find myself very much invested in Rand's, actually almost any part of Rand's personal life now as he evolves more into the Dragon Reborn.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was describing in the first book of this series, right? I don't care about Rand the farmer. I don't care about Rand the kid who is maybe in love with the princess, if that could ever possibly happen, right? I care about the Dragon Reborn. I think that is the fascinating part of that character. And so now we're finally getting to the point where that is who he can be. Don't drag me back into this love triangle stuff. Like, get me to the exciting part. That being said, if we have 3 potential love interests for Rand and we're saying we know 2 and we're not quite sure who the third is, I want to change gears a little bit. It's me, you're right. I want to change gears instead to another group of individuals who we had almost all of the names of, and I can now finish out this group. Tylor's 4 favorite characters who define this series for him. Cairhien, Egwene, Varen, and Aviendha. No other details so far, but boy, do I love me some Aviendha.
It, to that end, it did feel like when they're introducing all these characters, I'm like, oh, these ones are going to matter, aren't they? Like, you kind of do that gloss over. You're kind of like, yep, Stone River, whatever. And then you're like, oh, wait, like, we're getting a lot. So I better go back and reread that paragraph, because I think these characters are, if not sticking around here in this plot line, they will come back up over and over again. And so I go back to, I was surprised. Like, we are getting a lot of Aiel. Hearing how awful it is where they live now, it's like, well, I feel like already whatever resolution comes has to be a reunion of them into the fold of these people. My one other thought, I just want to say carefully, because we shouldn't cross streams, but I will say I was thinking a lot about a particular part of one episode of the television show when these characters appear. And I think it's obvious what it is if you've seen the show, but I don't want to spoil it for people who haven't. And I was like, oh, I can picture exactly what these people are like, and I can picture their intensity. So we'll leave it at that. But I was kind of glad to have those pieces to stick together, even if that's only something somebody reading at this, like, in the last year can have done.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the show has I obviously don't picture things, but it has redefined the way that I think about the Maidens of the Spear and the way that they fight and the way that they look and all of those things. And great, right? That's what these shows should do. They don't need to perfectly adapt everything from the book, but they give us something to latch on to. That's enough talking about like love triangles and what is going on in Egwene's head. I got some lore to talk about. Let's talk about the lore. A few things that really stood out to me as interesting here and potentially intriguing, things that maybe aren't like fully resolved in the exposition. I thought it was interesting that the Aiel are immediately looking at the girls' faces to determine whether they are wise ones, as they refer to them. I thought that was interesting because we've had references earlier in the book to Varen hiding her face or people noticing an Aes Sedai's face. So something is going on there. I also noted that we get this kind of vague reference to a sin in the ancient past of the Aiel that drove them into the desert, and that feels like something that really matters. And then the other thing is when Bane and Shiad are talking about what it means to be a maiden of the spear, they say something like the only way someone can stop being a maiden of the spear is either by dying or by going to Ruidin. And when they say that, they then immediately follow up, but some people resist going to Ruidin as long as they can. And that immediately makes me go, okay, someone among them is doing that. Is it Bane? Is it Shiad? Is it Avienda? We've got kind of these dangling holes in the otherwise pretty detailed exposition. That's immediately what I jumped to. Did any of those three kind of hanging mysteries stand out to you? Or was there anything else that you were like, I really need to know where this is going?
Of those three, it was the deep time one, specifically some kind of sin, and it was a sin between them and the Aes Sedai, as I recall, unless I made that up. Nope. So it was some previous allies, but then split apart. The faces thing didn't really register to me, but I did, just to pick up on a piece of that, I liked the idea of the wise one being what they call the Aes Sedai. Lord of the Rings, it got confusing to me the first time I read it, but they have like Gandalf has lots of different names, and the movie doesn't like say that's not true, but is a kind of version of that. Like when
have you
suddenly
tried
Mithrandir.
Have you tried to keep track of how many names Aragorn has? Oh my God. Before he's a king and after he's a king and when he's a ranger and dear Lord.
Yeah. So like that seems to be what we're saying here, right? And we've gotten the sense of this before, that the dragon reborn is he who rises with the sun. I forget what you just said it.
Comes with the dawn, but you were close. I'll give you credit for that.
Which made me want to say he should be coming from the east, not the west. But then I didn't know which direction the sun goes. I assume the sun goes the same direction here, but who knows?
It is Earth, so yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, who knows? Maybe when the breaking of the world happened, they reversed the sun, or maybe Superman spun the Earth the other way to turn back time. We don't know all the. Yeah, maybe that's the sin, Tylor. Huh? Maybe that's the sin.
That is a great sin.
So, all of that is like, that's intriguing to me, and I think especially where my head is at in the mythology of this place is I want to figure out actually what you just said, how this is Earth and what the kind of deep time scenarios are. That's more interesting to me than some of the other things you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, I think that all of those moments kind of pique my interest and get me excited, but absolutely nothing makes me smile in this chapter more than the description of just how afraid the Aiel are of swimming. Like, yeah, that's just a fun detail. And the other version of that really works.
Tylor is speaking as the guy who on our yearly cabin trips goes nowhere near the pond or the lake. So I just want that on the record for why he might like this so much.
That is 100% accurate. I don't need any more water in my life. The other version of this that I thought worked really well is Nynaeve is absolutely furious. Why did you move this woman? You might have made her bleed out. And the answer is she wanted to die near water. And that's beautiful for a desert culture.
Definitely. Makes me think of the end of Black Panther, the first one too, right? Like, it really is the beautiful sunset, right? Or, yeah, cool. I did cast aspersions on this chapter. So as we get towards the end, or maybe you have 10 more things for all I know.
No.
I do just say, like, I do appreciate this kind of chapter, and I do think it makes the experience richer. I was listening to the director, Christopher McQuarrie, director of Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, did 12 hours of background podcasting about the making of the film. And he said his entire experience as a filmmaker is making exposition like palatable. Like that's the one thing he can't crack. And so I was like, this is another version of that. Like it's just hard to get a lot of exposition out and to like have a cool new group enter in. It's like great, but like hold on, I gotta really slow this down and go through this all. I think that's tough. So I think it's done reasonably well for a fantasy book, but it's just always a hard part of fantasy.
Absolutely. And I think if we're thinking about Robert Jordan books in particular, I feel like the first third of his books are like, let me just set the table. And then the middle third are things start to move a little bit, but we're just picking up momentum. I need to kind of place the pieces where they need to go. And then the fun stuff happens. And I think we can kind of feel here the tug of that fun stuff. It's getting close enough. We kind of know the gravity is there. And that's almost what makes it more frustrating when we get an exposition chapter like this, right? I think this is a better chapter than chapter 8 of this book. I'm just picking an arbitrary number, but like I think it feels worse because we know how close we are to getting to the really good, exciting stuff. I just had one last note in this chapter, which is I'm really proud of Nynaeve for learning that if you need to be angry to channel, you can make yourself angry. Like that is the kind of like outside of the box lateral thinking. Like don't learn the Aes Sedai way of channeling. Just learn how to get mad. Good for her. Strategy effective.
That's my secret, Tyler. I'm always angry.
Oh, that's too good of a joke.
And I'm tapped. I didn't have anything on this chapter, so I'm following your lead here.
Yeah, honestly, Maidens of the Spear is a chapter that introduces a culture that I find really fascinating, and to some degree, introducing a culture can only make you so interested in a chapter, even if it's useful and valuable, and we know why it's worth it. Next week, we have to slow down in the sense that we only have 2 chapters, but I'm pretty sure we'll actually be reading more than we did this week because chapter 39, right, Threads in the Pattern, and chapter 40, A Hero in the Night, are real long chapters, but also I will note real good chapters. Greg, take us out of the episode.
I could tell from those titles because what we do as the episode begins and we start recording is we sit and we're like, oh, wait, we forgot to write down the chapter titles. And when we find goodies like that one, I'm like, oh, man, maybe I'll just skip this episode and go upstairs and read. But, you know, hey, it wouldn't be us approaching the end of the book if we didn't know we are closing in on the marker. I would say maybe not this week, but next week we're hitting the marker where it's like, oh, I would be staying up the rest of the night to finish this. The like last 100 pages cruise. We're just a little over 200 now, but you know, in a big fantasy book, it's usually like the last 200-page cruise. So I would be there if I was allowed to be there.
And it'll only take us 8 weeks instead of one feverish night.
So we will start that journey through those 8 weeks next time through the Glass Columns. So ends another episode of Through the Glass Columns. We thank you for joining us and continuing with us on our quest to cover all of the Wheel of Time in our own sweet time.
This podcast features original content developed by Tylor Orm and Greg Cass and is not in any way affiliated with, associated with, or condoned by the Robert Jordan Estate, Tor Fantasy, or Amazon. All content is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only.
If you're enjoying this podcast, please seek out the books from your local bookshop or library and join us as we continue our journey. If you'd like to contact us to share your thoughts or give feedback, you can email us at throughtheglasscolumns@gmail.com or find us on Instagram and Twitter by searching Through the Glass Columns.
Thank you once again for being part of this community. If you're enjoying the show, please subscribe to the show, leave us a review wherever you're listening, and recommend this show on your social media to help us grow our community. We look forward to welcoming you back next time through the Glass Columns.